What's up, investors? It's the Russian dude. In an era where glossy conference rooms and staged selfies have become substitutes for genuine diplomacy, the recent talks in Istanbul feel nothing like negotiations and more like a PR campaign. Russia never refused peace, its representatives proclaimed. We are ready to talk with no preconditions, but if Ukraine does not want to satisfy our conditions of withdrawing from all occupied territories, then no talks are possible. It's like they don't even see them contradicting themselves in literally the very same sentence. And I mean, guys, you've seen all these highly edited photos from Istanbul. Sharply dressed diplomats, chilling in leather chairs, sipping not Russian but regular tea under ancient chandeliers, while claiming they represent millions. But who exactly are they? What interests do they defend when Russia's citizens, those living beyond poverty line, have not been asked a single question? Meanwhile, back home, villages and small towns are erecting black obelisks to mourn their lost sons, fathers and brothers. A very stark reminder that war's true cost never makes it into the glossy brochures of state media. To make things even worse, some so-called diplomats, personally instructed by Putin, well, they say that Russia is ready to fight for another 20 years if necessary, if this is what it takes to fully liberate the rest of Ukraine. Diplomats, by the way, those people who kinda have to work hard to de-escalate the situation and find a common ground, but okay, whatever, that's like probably Russian-style diplomacy anyways. So, who is going to fight for the next 20 years? Will the objectives change? Why does Putin switch his already ridiculous mentality about the invasion? Let's try to answer those questions in today's video. When Vladimir Medinsky and his well-tailored crew declare, "We are ready to fight for another 20 years and retake 6 regions," I mean, whose blood are they pledging? Certainly not their own, and definitely not their kids or grandchildren. Of course, it is easy to make such horrible statements when your own bloodline is completely safe. They are not drafting governors or generals, they are speaking on behalf of anonymous factory workers, farmers and desperate people on the edge of financial disaster. Basically ordinary people whose votes are never counted, whose concerns are never voiced, and whose lives are not valued at all. I mean, picture the contrast. On one side, men in expensive suits praise the eternal war. And on the other, grandmothers in Alexeyevka adding names to a memorial obelisk erected in their village main square. 2 men lost in Afghan conflict, 1 more in the Chechen campaign, and then 34 sacrificed in the so-called special military operation, which is still far from its end. Out of a district population of just over 10,000, that's 1 life lost for approximately every 320 residents. Does this statistic steer any responsibility in the cheerful rooms of Istanbul? Or is it merely another consequences of war, buried beneath press releases and photo shoots? Let's not kid ourselves. Those Istanbul negotiations never represented Russian society. There were no factory floor testimonials, no teachers or retirees in attendance, no crowds of concerned mothers pressing for their sons' safe return. Instead, the government staged a diplomatic fashion show, trading boiled-down slogans and empty threats. The message was loud and clear: we control the narrative, and dissent, especially from the provinces, is never interrupting the actual script. In these globalized settings, outcomes are measured in press coverage rather than human lives saved. But what good are any negotiations if half the country remains voiceless, if not more? If the district's obelisks could speak, it would scream from the real suffering is that it is not negotiable, even if the Kremlin insists otherwise. And what about that stupid phrase, "we are ready to fight for another 20 years if needed"? How did we come here from just a quick 3-day war and then Kiev falls? Well, I don't know. It's just incredible how little Putin thinks of his own people. He thinks they will forget everything if you just stop repeating the same things over and over again. But people, they do never forget. They keep those things deep inside, and when the moment is right, everything will come out in a single motion of untamed rage. All is needed is a single spark, which will most likely come out of a very unexpected place. A place that Putin will ignore and miscalculate. He is just a human after all, and humans, sooner or later, they do make mistakes. Can this spark be a nationwide realization that the losses of not even a real war exceeded all the real wars in the past since the Second World War? It might very well be, so let's talk about this thing right now. Take Alexeyevka, a village in the Samara region where a looming black pillar now lists those lost to conflicts spanning 4 entire decades. Afghan veterans, Chechen conscripts, and the fresh wave of contract so-called soldiers from the Ukrainian front lines, all inscribed in code Cyrillic. This monument is not a boast, it is a confession. Every carved name is a person torn from community, family, and future. Each entry tells a story of hopes unfulfilled. Alexander Dyakov, for example, a 34-year-old agricultural worker with dreams of expanding his small plot of land. Evgeny Sinichkin, who thought mandatory service in 2017 was a perfect extent of his military career. And then Alexander Baskakov, a 23-year-old college graduate whose ambition to build rural infrastructure died alongside him. Now imagine going through losses of Stary Oskol, another city marked by inconceivable grief. 11 lost in Afghanistan, 18 in Chechnya, and then 252 in only 4 months of this special military operation. That's more than 60 recruits per month, 2 to 3 per day, each one snatched from parent, spouse or child.
Кадры военной хроники, письма матерям и женам, солдатские песни. Когда на экране поплыли фотографии погибших старооскольцев, 11 не вернулись из Афганистана, 18 сложили головы в Чечне и 252 бойца на сегодня полегли на полях специальной военной операции, заплакали даже мужчины.
And keep in mind that considered KIA often masks those missing in action, bodies never recovered, or those who returned damaged beyond recognition. Wounded survivors face lifelong dependency, with families thrust into unpaid caregiver roles. No veteran's pension would ever cover the cost of full-time nursing, nor does any propaganda poster show a soldier's mother emptying her own life savings to repair deteriorating health which was left in Ukraine. These obelisks and obituary lists are not depressing museum pieces, they are urgent alarms. They tell us the collapse of young lives is not a statistics but a communal wound. Yet, the state-managed media treats every village's tragedy as a sidebar to triumphant war reports. How is it possible to claim progress when villages hemorrhage their youth and return nothing but coffins and broken families? There should be a time when losses mount so high that the collective grief will no longer be able to tolerate this nonsense. No amount of propaganda or heroic capture of 300 people village in Ukraine will ever return thousands of lost sons. And mothers' voices should be all assembled in one loud roar, the one that will be heard all the way to Kremlin. Until then, the regime of Putin continues to use all means possible to replenish its ranks daily, with forced mobilization, slowly taking over all other methods. Because let's be honest, not too many people are left in Russia who are willing to go fight in Ukraine on their own. Let's talk about forced mobilization in our next chapter. When cash incentives and glossy recruitment videos stopped working, the Kremlin turned to more primitive tactics: forced enlistment. In Moscow, breaking into apartment buildings and snatching men off subways became kind of routine. Doors kicked open at the dead of the night, men dragged away before the sun rises, and then families left completely shocked what's happened. In Vladivostok, for example, military enlistment officers slipped through windows like some kind of hooligan teenagers, and definitely not Putin's well-respected army image. And then they started brandishing orders and threats until terrified residents signed on the dotted lines. Rural areas already depleted by waves of economic migrants and aging populations became hunting grounds. Officials blackmailed debt-ridden villagers or deceived the desperate, saying just sign here and your family's rent is already covered, don't even worry about it. Only then to see those families plunged deeper into misery once the small print consumed every single ruble they received. What was once a taboo now enjoys open acknowledgement. Ministers publicly debate whether conscripting draft dodgers in nightclubs is too harsh, and then they just shrug and say, but why not? Meanwhile, the official line insists the army is entirely voluntarily, as if Andrei Gurulyov's televised call to grab dodgers at subway stations never happened. It is already May 2025, but the rhetoric remains stuck in March 2022, like trying to reboot an old operating system that no longer supports modern reality. End result? A fractured fighting force assembled together from stolen futures. A military whose ranks swell only through fear, coercion, and the promise of a paycheck that never arrives. And even if it does, in many cases, it is taken away as an insurance against being sent in these so-called meat assaults with only one-way ticket. Such tactics expose the regime's true desperation. When volunteers vanish and bonuses lose their attractiveness, the state resorts to simple blunt force. There is no pride in this mechanized activity, only the grim acknowledgement that millions must fill quotas at any cost. Each forced contract is another stain on the nation's consciousness, another promise broken, another family left to wonder if their son or brother will ever step through the door again. If forced enlistment is the state's sledgehammer, propaganda is its velvet glove, designed to mask brutality with pseudo-heroics. Boxers like, for example, Denis Lebedev wears ornate uniforms and then poses in videos as symbols of valor. The visuals speak of medals and glory, but the reality is a lifetime chain to dependency. A lieutenant's ring glints on a swollen finger, but it cannot promise financial stability for the widow or education for the orphaned child. What's worse is that once respected by many Russians boxer tells little boy in a scolding manner that this is the real hero of Russia. This is who this little boy should strive to become. I mean, business, commerce, science, engineering, forget about this Western capitalistic clownship. To give your life and limbs for the motherland, that's the real glory and goal of every Russian man. Social media Kremlin bots churn out heartwarming snapshots of perfect family soldiers, yet they fail to show the swollen limbs and the round-the-clock caregivers, and then the night spent crying on the hospital's floors. Worse still, the regime weaponizes grief itself. Plaques in school corridors now commemorate teenagers like Alexander Vinshu, indoctrinated in graduation ceremonies and then sent off almost immediately with speeches proclaiming courage and sacrifice. Vinshu, unfortunately for his parents, died at 18, only old enough to enlist but too young to fathom the abyss waiting for him. His plaque still sits beside those of other fallen youth, a horrible exhibit of propaganda success. The message is brutal, kill or be killed, and if a boy gives his life, it becomes proof of the state's righteousness. But why does this cruel show persist? Because every tearful story of valor distracts from the morning horrors. While viewers sob over medals, they forget to question why so many names end up on the obelisks instead of diplomas. They accept that citizens choose to serve, ignoring that this choice vanishes when soldiers were literally forced into conscription drives. And so the velvet glove on propaganda pats them gently while the sledgehammer of forced enlistment breaks lives beyond repair. All the way until there is nothing else left to break, and the path forward will be only to rise from the ashes. Well, there you have it, guys. If you enjoyed today's episode and if you want to see more videos like this, please subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. If you wish to support my work, there are links down below. For example, you can buy our merch on therussiandude.com. All the links once again are down below. Thanks so much for watching. See you tomorrow.
We won't succumb to their tricks, the facade they try to sell. Their twisted words and feeble claims on us all they cannot quell. We see through their lies, their feeble attempts to sway.